My name's Daisy. I'm the Science Engagement and Outreach Manager at Animal Aid, and I work in promoting non-animal research with our education team. I'm joined by my colleague Arabella, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Arabella. I'm really excited to be here today. I work in the communications department at Animal Aid. I have a background in law and communications, but I have a lot of experience in various campaigns for animals, and particularly animal-free research and promoting animal-free science.
Perfect. And we're joined by the amazing Alexis. Alexis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Alexis, and I am a current fourth-year PhD candidate in neuroscience over at the University of Rochester in New York.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us. So we got in touch with you, Alexis, after seeing your very inspiring post on LinkedIn. So you mentioned on your post that from an early age, you wanted to be a scientist and a teacher. Can you tell us a bit about why science and specifically neuroscience was so special and important to you?
Yeah, so I actually remember the first time I really realized that I wanted to get into the biological sciences. So this was in high school biology class. And we were doing our genetics unit, and we were specifically looking at Punnett squares. And I remember being just so interested in the fact that you could literally basically draw out these squares, write a bunch of letters, and sort of determine how traits were inherited. And that was the first time I was like, oh, wow, like we actually do know a lot about biology and about humans, and you can kind of just figure this out. I was like, this is so cool. And like my teacher at the time, she saw how excited I was, and she gave me like these like massive Punnett squares, was like figure out like all these traits and like how they interact. And I was like, wow, this is truly like the best thing ever. And so that sort of sparked my interest in the biological sciences as a whole. And I actually went to I'm from originally a pretty small town in Pennsylvania. So I didn't really know exactly what neuroscience is. And I think a lot of people in, sort of high school don't really know about these like kind of more niche specific sciences. And then when I went to university, I got into a research program that actually let me research sort of that summer before starting my first year there. It was called the Advanced Research Cohort. And there I was in a neuroscience lab. So we were looking at the effect of the SAD, or standard American diet, on sort of anxiety and impulsivity. We were actually using rat models. And so I was like, oh, this is cool. And like at that time, like over the summer, I didn't have to sacrifice any of the animals. I just got to kind of like play with them, put them in mazes. And so I was like, oh, I love the rats. Like, this is so cute. And then when it was time I started school and I decided I wanted to look for another lab. I ended up in a different neuroscience lab that I stayed in for sort of the rest of my time there. Studying optic nerve regeneration, and that was in Xenopus, so like an aquatic frog model. And yeah, I kind of realized, okay, like I keep picking these labs about neuroscience, maybe this is something I'm actually interested in. And just thinking it's cool that you're kind of like using your own brain to sort of study the human brain, which is like such a complex organ that we don't really know anything about. And I was like, okay, like this is actually like really cool. And then I somehow grad school. So
Amazing.
It sounds like obviously you've had such a long-term interest and passion for science, but you also mentioned that you're a fairly long-term vegan as well, and obviously committed to living a life free of animal exploitation. So it's really interesting to think about someone in your industry and in academia. Once you went vegan and you were working in that industry, how did you navigate the internal conflicts that started to arise with using animals in experiments?
Yeah, so I think an important factor in this is that I did start animal research at the age of 17, which is a fairly young age to sort of be indoctrinated into something. And so I think from such an early age, I was kind of like, oh, like this is just how we do science. This is what this field is. This is science. At that time, I started to transition into like eating less meat. I ended up vegan by 2019. and then sort of continued out animal research until actually around last year. This time is when I decided to stop. I feel like when I was younger, I didn't think about it as much. Like I said, a lot of my work was in sort of frogs, which I think with amphibians, I was able to sort of disconnect a little bit more. Then when I got to graduate school, a lot of the labs at my university use mice. And I remember during my first rotation with mouse models, talking to the professor and telling him, hey, I don't know if this is something I can do. I don't know if this is where my line is drawn. Just kind of letting you know. And he was very understanding during the rotation. He was like, you don't have to, obviously, during the rotation, but if this is, a lab you want to join, you're going to have to do this eventually. So keep that in mind as you navigate, what's best for you. I then I ended up thinking after that, I was like, okay, well, I do want to do this kind of science, so I'm just going to try it. Started to work with the mouse models, then did another rotation that was also with mouse work, and then ended up joining the lab I used for that, or I did that third rotation with. And so the experiments are the way that we use mice in animal research. I genuinely believe if the general public knew what was going on, or saw videos of what happens, they would not be pleased. Vegans and non-vegans. I think a lot of people are better at drawing the line of animal cruelty in the terms of like science experiments and animal testing, versus like animal agriculture. But, or maybe not, like better is not the right word, but like are more willing to draw the line there.
There's a perception that you don't care about humans, or that you care about animals more, and it's this idea of placing an animal's life above a human's, rather than realizing that you're just trying to answer the wrong questions when you involve an animal. And it's so interesting to hear more as well about your experience and that journey that you went on as those kind of doubts crept in, because it does sound like it was that building block journey situation for you. But you did write about how those doubts grew bigger when the experiments became more intense. So was there a specific moment, a specific experiment or example where you really kind of thought, I have to walk away from this now?
Yes. I will say first, it's funny you guys say that too, because they obviously I'm in America, so my statistics are like from what's going on here. But 95% of clinical trials fail, and nobody's really questioning if that's because we're using models that are, not human. And something else that I really think about a lot since I've kind of like started this journey is I feel like a lot of times scientists ask, can I ask this question, not should I ask this question? And especially when there's a lot of lives at risk for running these experiments in the way they are traditionally done right now, I feel like nobody's really considering the bigger picture or the potential effect of the questions they're having, and if it's something that's kind of worth investigating. People hate to hear me say this, especially in terms of like graduate school, because a lot of graduate school projects are just whatever your advisor happened to like figure out and whatever there's money for. There were like two sort of like trigger points. So one was like 6 months before I made the final cut, and the 6 months went. This is kind of funny, but I started thinking really about what I was doing after I saw. Have you guys seen the Guardians of the Galaxy 3 movie? It sounds so funny, but I think PETA awarded it like one of the best like vegan like films of the year or something, because the whole thing was actually kind of about animal testing. So it was about like with the perspective of Rocket, who's like a raccoon that was like animal tested on, and like his story. And I watched that in theaters with my friend, and then I left and I said, oh my God, this is
Wow.
this is literally what I'm doing. Like that is so bad. And then that sort of like it's so funny that that sparked it, but then I really started thinking about it, and I actually a couple weeks after is when I started talking to like people that were like in charge of my program about sort of not knowing if I can continue with animal research. And like I said, I think the things they were saying were like, well, wouldn't you rather do it because someone's going to do it anyways? And if you're being more ethical about it and you're being more considerate of the animals' lives, like just think about it and think about what you're losing. If you leave your lab, there's a lot to like think about, like sort of trying to like maybe not intentionally, but like kind of convince me that it's okay and to stay. And I do think part of that as well is that the majority of people in my department are animal researchers. And so I think I wonder if some of that is almost kind of like also justifying their own like participation in the system. But so that happened, and I was kind of like upset about that conversation because I was thinking this person clearly isn't like hearing what I'm saying or doesn't understand how I feel as someone who, yeah, is living my life, the rest of my life free of animal exploitation. And then for my whole career, which I'm doing, 8+ hours a day, doing basically animal exploitation, bringing animals in this world just to end up, killing them. And then 6 months later is when I actually stopped. And so I remember my experiments started to turn. So I studied Fragile X syndrome, which is like the biggest monogenic cause of autism spectrum disorder, which back to the should or would, I also was so a lot of the autism research is interesting because I don't believe autism is like something we need to like cure, but a lot of the like funding agencies that are supporting this research have sort of like different and controversial opinions. It's a very controversial field to kind of work in. So I was also thinking about that, like what am I actually doing here? But we I was working with adult animals up until that time, and then someone said, "Oh, you should actually look in development since this is a developmental disorder." And so I was trained on how to basically image the brains of live pups, so like little baby mice, and then I learned how to do the process, and then I was like, okay, I kind of learned it. I really hated watching it happen, especially to the little babies. And then when we were done, she was like, okay, well, I brought like 20 of the pups up here and took them from their mom, and we don't need them anymore. So can you just like sacrifice them all? And I was like, oh my God. And so I did. I just basically sacrificed. And we say the word sacrifice. See, that's even like trying to sugarcoat what's happening.
Also something quite moralistic about it, rather than like they call in farming it's processing, for example, and they don't say like disposing or dispatching, but the idea of sacrificing almost, yeah, it suggests that there's a greater good that you're working towards, even if this is a kind of moral compromise in the moment, that is worth it for the greater good, which is such an interesting use of language, especially when you talk about a feeling of indoctrination at a young age, and you think about the that kind of subtle language. I hadn't heard that before, and that's quite shocking. So was it that specific moment of having to sacrifice all those little pups, was that the thing that really triggered it for you?
It was. I think a week later is when I just woke up and I was like, I'm actually done. Like if I touch one more animal, like I made a promise to myself. I like woke up and I was like, that's it. I'm done. I literally don't care about the consequences. I refuse. Like I refuse to do it one more time. So
what was that impact, like just gradually, but also at that moment, what was the impact of conducting animal research on your mental health as well?
Yeah, so that I feel like I didn't realize how much it was impacting me in the moment, but the more and more I get removed from it, I realize how bad that really was. And so when you conduct animal research, right when you get trained, they sort of talk to you about that you have to sort of disconnect part of yourself to be able to do the things that you're doing to these animals. And I even remember the first time I heard someone say that, and I thought, should we be disconnecting part of our brain to do this? Should we be disconnecting from our emotions? To do, like, is nobody questioning? So I didn't realize so much at the time, but that disconnect, you can't turn that on and off like this. And I was pretty much disconnected from my emotions and my connection to animals in the rest of my life, which is especially difficult when, like, as a vegan, my connection to animals is something that is a huge part of my identity. And I mean, I have pet rabbits, and so here I am doing these things to mice, which are not that far from rabbits, and then I'm coming home and I can't even pet. So my rabbits like being kind of like scratched on the back of their neck, and that is the location that we would cervically dislocate the mice to, again, sacrifice them. And I couldn't pet my own pets because I was sort of traumatized from what I was doing with these other animals at work, and then coming home, and you can't just expect that not to like seep into other aspects of your life. So it was truly a lot, and truly a lot that I'm honestly still dealing with to this day, just having like images in my brain of like what I participated in.
You mentioned as well how obviously, like, within your research group and within the research community, how there was this kind of emphasis on indoctrination and like, this is what we do. But did you find, or have you found since, that there's much awareness or promotion of animal-free research or alternatives? Do people talk about it? Have you noticed more?
So I'd say now that I'm in the field, it is easier to find access to these. But prior to this sort of transition, I had no idea that this was even a thing. Like, I did not know organ on a chip technologies was happening. I didn't know that it was happening at my university. So how I found my lab actually is my university made a LinkedIn post about my new PI, which stands for principal investigator. And they said, NIH awards, it's like a $7.5 million grant to like this, to open this center, this like translational center to work on phasing out animal testing. And I was like, what? Like, what is happening? I was like, this sounds perfect. This is real. And so I clicked on it, and my new PI is over in biomedical engineering. So within my little field of neuroscience biology, I didn't really know this was happening. Like, mouse is like the gold standard. I actually had to go over to another department to sort of like learn about these technologies. And I do generally think that the knowledge within like the biological sciences is a lot less. But once I kind of like got into this field, I remember just being so shocked to find these things. Like, I was in the lab and I saw a magazine from a conference known as the like microphysiological like system symposium. And it was like sponsored by, and it was like all these organizations trying to end animal testing. I was like, there are organizations, like scientific organizations trying to end animal testing. This is crazy. And then and then when I made my LinkedIn post too, I realized, I was like, PETA has a science division? Like what is this? I had no idea these things were happening. And I obviously, like, as a vegan and a scientist, was like, this is like the coolest thing ever. But yeah, nobody really, I don't think it's very widespread unless you're kind of like in that, bubble.
Yeah, I think that's why for us as well, having this chat with you and like the stuff we're doing at Animal Aid within our education team, it's almost like that's something we've learned as well, that when we're talking to, like, we host a conference every year called the Future of Science Conference, and over here it's like A-level students, so kind of 16 to 18-year-olds. A lot of them will say to us at the end of it, I didn't even realise there were all these other career options open to me. I thought it was either like become a doctor or become
Yep.
a research scientist that does like basically does animal research. I didn't know there were all these other options out there. Like, unless you're kind of looking for it, quite often it's hard to find.
Yeah.
How did you, I know you said you saw the post on LinkedIn, so or correct me if I'm wrong, was it that after you saw the post you decided I'm going to get like contact them?
I saw the post right around the same time that I decided I was done. Actually, I think it might have been like a couple days before I decided to like fully like pull the plug on animal research and talk to my PI about leaving my lab. And so I was at that time I was like, I hope, you know, because in academia sometimes professors can not have the most like healthy lab environments. So I saw this and I got excited about the research and I was like, oh my gosh, like I really hope that he's like, you know, a good person as well. Which I also didn't know anything about because I was in neuroscience and he's over in biomedical engineering. So I don't have all the, you know, information from other students about what kind of lab he runs. But I actually talked to, so my old PI, her husband was in biomedical engineering, and I asked him about my new PI, and he said, oh, not only is he a good scientist, but he's a good person. And I was like, okay, great. Good to know. And then so I emailed him, was like, hey, here's my story, like full transparency, everything. I'm vegan. I left animal research. I'm looking for a new lab. Can we talk about it? And we got on a Zoom meeting, and I remember he said, I don't remember the exact words, but it was something, it was very encouraging words like, well, you know, I'm proud of you, and you doing this just shows your maturity. And it was a very sort of refreshing conversation, whereas someone was looking at what I was doing and sort of applauding me for my choices, where I was really afraid that for the most part I would be kind of iced out of science, given that I started to sort of express these opinions that were sort of against the status quo. So after that conversation, I was like, okay, I think this will be great. Ended up doing a pretty expedited rotation, loved everyone in the lab. And then the switch was made. So
it's really encouraging, I think, to hear that you were able to find that kind of situation. I also think it's so important for organizations like us and others to really listen to your story as well, that we need to make sure that we're doing all we can to find the people so they're not just finding us. Could you also tell us more about the stuff that you're doing now? So the organ on the chip models you're working on, and how you see these kinds of technologies advancing cruelty-free science?
Yeah, so basically our organ on a chip models sort of combine two technologies. So the technology of induced pluripotent stem cells, which are patient derived, you can get from people, which is great. And then microphysiological systems, which basically is a big fancy word, but if you break it down is you know, tiny little systems that sort of can be used to mimic biology and mimic biological flow, such as, you know, sort of blood flow, cerebral spinal fluid, etc. And basically combining these technologies with a little device that actually my PI sort of pioneered, that uses a special like silicone membrane that has this sort of like optical clarity for imaging purposes. We model barrier systems. And so as a neuroscientist, I study the blood-brain barrier. So we can take these little like, we call them devices that are basically the size of, honestly, kind of like your fingernail. And we put different cell types in different compartments to sort of mimic the system, and then can use them ideally to sort of work with or sort of replace animal use in sort of like pharmacological words. The like science words are like so big. And basically in drug testing research.
They don't make
It
it
is
easy
one of
for
those.
anyone, do they?
I mean, that all sounds so exciting, and I think, like, it's something that we get very excited about, like organs on chips, and it's a really, it's a very new age of science, and it's like we use the phrase a lot here, better science. Do you think, again, like now that you're in this new field, do you get the feeling that as a whole, the scientific community are becoming more kind of accepting of these new non-animal methods?
Yeah, so I think there is still a lot of pushback on using these models to study certain things. The most common one is that you cannot use these devices for sort of systemic testing. So people really make the argument that things such as like off-target effects with drugs, or how they work in like an entire biological system, that you can only really study that in an entire biological system, i.e. an animal. People people are really hesitant to accept these. I think a lot of it is kind of the system as well. I know you mentioned before how sort of publishers will sometimes ask for a follow-up animal experiment to prove something, even if your paper was pretty free of animal methods. I'm actually part of this working group with this organization called COLAB, so COLAAB. It's the Coalition to Illuminate and Address Animal Methods Bias, that are kind of trying to tackle this issue from the publisher and the grant side. So they are kind of, contacting publishers who require sort of animal experiments as like follow-ups, or people who award sort of grants to sort of like try to redirect the funding. I guess this is a difficult question because it is a multi-dimensional thing. So it's at like the system level, like the funding, the publishing, the individuals and their acceptedness, and with that, scientists being very stubborn people. And then, yeah, and with that stubbornness as well, I feel like people really defend their model, but a lot of times the only reason they use that model is just because they happened to be trained on that model, which is also just a very interesting concept. In general, I think science is well due for a rewrite. Like, when is the last time we discovered something that really had that much effect? Like, we're saying, oh, like, I think of the common poster where it's like, who would you rather see die or whatever, and it's like a rat and her are like separated, and it's like a rat and then it's like a little girl. But we haven't, it's been decades since we've had any substantial scientific progress. And so we really do need the shift, but people really dig their heels in. So
that actually leads me on to my next question very perfectly, actually, which is, how do you personally envision the future of science, and what part do you see yourself playing in that?
Yes, so this one's also hard because something I've been sort of trying to deal with since I've made this switch, and the further away I'm from animal research, the more I'm like, this is actually like really messed up, and I don't even want to sit through a presentation and hear about your experiment that, again, quite frankly, maybe we shouldn't have asked. We're just asking it because we can ask it about all the lives you used, but it's difficult because there's what I want to see happen, and then there's the way to approach it that people will most likely change. So I would just love to see animal use and testing stop, not only in the aspect of like the animals themselves, but we use animals for so many scientific reagents, right? Like antibodies or serums for cell culture. So like, even though I'm working with cell culture, and I try as best as I can, and I really would love to make a completely animal-free model, like a lot of the technologies aren't there yet with like sort of like bovine serum and like stuff like that. So I think given that this is a very systemic issue, I think the best way to sort of tackle it is kind of starting at the top. So redirecting funding. Like, I know there's a lot of campaigns in the US to sort of like cut animal funding, like especially through the NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health that funds probably, I think, most of the animal research kind of going on over here, but sort of redirect that funding. And then as well as, I guess, twofold. So probably working at that top end is going to have the greatest impact. And then also working with early career researchers, which I think are the people most likely to be open to this sort of change and to sort of like try to catch them while they're still early in the system. Especially given knowing myself, like how much indoctrination goes into things, as well as kind of like once you're in it, I feel like there is a level of like personal guilt. Like if you make the decision to decide like, I'm actually done with this, this is messed up, I refuse to do it anymore, you now also have to cope with the fact that you have participated in that system for a really long time, which can be really, really hard for people. So I want a future where this is happening, and I do think we're making progress. I think it's going to be a long journey. It's not going to be something that happens overnight, but I think it's so funny because I used to say before I even left animal research, I was like, animal research is so weird. What if we just like stopped all animal research and just took all the best minds who are working on all these things to develop these new methods? Because people always say these methods aren't good enough yet. I'm like, well, if we just took every single scientist who's working on animal research and we said, here are these new methods, like we would make so much progress so quickly because the turnaround time is faster too.
Something that I've found really exciting since being at Animal Aid, we collaborate with a laboratory that's based in the UK called Accelerate, and they're the only fully vegan, non-animal testing safety lab. So like you say, very, very often it's very difficult to avoid serums and other things that come from animals, but that, for me, even the fact that they exist gives me hope.
Especially, we touched on it previously and you said yourself, I think it's really important. It's the awareness, isn't it? And we're fighting against a lot of ingrained thinking, and you talk about all the kind of best minds coming together, and so encouraging the people who are already kind of in that game and are aligned to actually come together and be a stronger force. I mean, it's going to mean more success. And you touched on a lot of challenges, but also a lot of hopes as well. So what advice would you give to others who, aspire to pursue a career in science, but they also want to align their work with their ethics and an ethical commitment to cruelty-free practices? Do you have any words of wisdom for them, essentially?
Yeah, I guess I would tell them that there are options for you. You can find a place that agrees with your ethics and does the science you want to do. That is possible. I honestly think that's the number one and biggest piece of advice because like we touched on and you said in your program as well, people just don't realize that this is a thing. And especially when you're an early career researcher, you kind of maybe don't have as much like ability to set the parameters of what's going on. But there are options, and I would not be afraid to be fully transparent with everyone you talk to about your values and what you want out of whether it's your degree or your job, whatever, and you will find someone who sort of gives you that freedom to do what you want in an ethical way, in a way that's congruent with your values. You can do it. I feel like a lot of people too like are in animal research and they always say that they hate it and they don't want to do it and they're just afraid to take sort of that step. And so in sharing my story, I also hoped that I could show them that you really can just stop. Like you can stop and it will be okay. You will find something else. There's people out there to support you. There's a whole community of individuals that think about these things that maybe you don't see within your immediate university, your job, whatever, but there are people out there that feel exactly the way you're feeling, and honestly, that anything's possible.
Thank you for your time, because
Yeah.
I really do hope that this will be inspiring, but also really practically informative for people as well, which is really great. And the amount you've done in such a short time of making this switch and being so vocal is exactly the kind of voices that we need, I think. So yeah, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you. Inspiration, a female scientist, which we love. And as Arabella says, somebody who's doing so much in such a short time. I can only imagine the impact you're going to make in a positive way in science going forward. So thank you so much. It's been amazing speaking with you.
Always nice. I'm so grateful that me putting my post and my sort of feelings out there has really connected to me to this web of scientists, to nonprofits, to all these really amazing people that sort of share my values and my vision. And I think this sense of community is just really essential, I mean, for human nature in general. And I couldn't be more grateful for where life has like taken me in the last year and sort of the people I've connected with. So thank you guys also.